All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. You are in Open Pedagogy in Action, a learning circle case study. And we're going to take a second to introduce ourselves, and then I'll share the agenda and we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tanya Grosz, and I'm the Director of Educational Programs for the Open Education Network and a longtime English professor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Woolsey. I teach astronomy and physics at Grand Rapids Community College. I am also the OER coordinator on campus, and I participated in the first learning circle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Larson. I am the Affordable Learning Instructional Consultant at The Ohio State University. And during the creation of this learning circle, I was the Open Education Network's Open Pedagogy Fellow. And I developed the curriculum and piloted the first round of the learning circle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Witman. I am the Open Educational Practices Specialist for the OEN, and I am currently facilitating the learning circle.
Okay, so for our agenda, we have completed one thing, big check mark off. We're going to share sort of the learning circle context, why we did this, what did the Open Education Network kind of want to get out of it. I will talk about how we built the learning curriculum, and Jamie will also share how we collaborated during that process to do that. Lauren is going to share her experience in the learning circle, and then we'll share a couple lesson learns and hand off the curriculum to you and hopefully have plenty of time for questions and answers. This morning, we are going to be using Mentimeter, and there are a couple ways that you can join. You can go to menti.com and enter the code 17062358, or you can use the QR code and join from your phone. And Jamie has put the link in the chat, which might be the quickest way to join if you're on a computer. And we'll give folks a couple seconds to get into the Mentimeter. And our goal with Mentimeter today is to show you kind of the way that we used it inside of the learning circle. So we're going to do the same opening and closing activities that we would have done in the learning circle. So you'll get to experience that. And then there will be some Mentimeter questions peppered throughout the presentation that will get some information from you. Very similar to the way that we might have asked questions during the learning circle, only sort of in a professional development, like conference style questions this time. Looks like we have people clicking on the little thumbs up button to let us know that we're in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to navigate to the next question. So the first question I have is, how are you feeling today? You have the option of selecting that your brain is full, that you feel fabulous, that you're feeling sleepy, energized, mellow like a marshmallow, excited like a toddler hopped up on sugar, or overwhelmed by all the feelings and information that you're taking in. And all of these answers are completely wonderful and viable. And we are, it's awesome to sort of be in the space that we're in and be able to name those feelings, no matter if our brains are already full from day one, because let me tell you, mine is. My brain is very full. We have lots of folks who are super excited or mellow. I'm really enjoying that. So we started every learning circle doing sort of like a little touch-in to see how people were feeling that day and sort of judge the way that we might do the pacing for the learning circle. I also really enjoy that dancing bunny. Next up is we would ask sort of a community building question. So what do we all have in common that we can sort of build community around? And today's question is, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? If we were in person, y'all, I would be taking y'all on ice cream adventures. We would find some local ice cream eatery to go try ice cream at. And so I always like to throw in an ice cream question. And so what we discovered during the learning circle is that you can't possibly put enough options in this question. So we added put it in the chat so you could share what's different. Honeygram, that sounds delicious. Blue Moon also sounds delicious. Looks like mint chocolate chip is our winner today. I had the best twisted ice cream at OE Global last week. It was toasted black sesame and pistachio. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it off to Tanya to talk a little bit about the background for why the OEN wanted to do this.
Greetings again. Anything banana and chocolate, that sounds good to me as well. So why did we decide to delve into open pedagogy? Well, we had really been hearing for several years that our members wanted more training, more resources, more professional development around open pedagogy, which can be kind of nebulous and kind of squishy. So in 2021, we did some strategic planning, out of which an open pedagogy action pathway was created. We were very committed to running a fellowship program like we had run that year with Jasmine Roberts Cruz, whose focal area was the intersection of open ed and social justice. But we knew that we wanted the next fellow to focus on open pedagogy, and we discovered the very wonderful Amanda Larson wanted to do that for us. Our train the trainer philosophy really underscores all that we do because it intersects with our commitment to shared abundance. We wanted to create professional development and resources that can be taken and adopted and adapted by higher ed institutions everywhere. So we not only create the resources, but we wanted to create training regarding how those resources can be effectively used. And of all the things I'm about to show you on this next slide, which has a lot of words, so sorry about that, open pedagogy is the thing that I think faculty have the most fear around. We kept hearing, and actually we keep hearing this, am I doing it right? Is this good enough? Am I doing it? Oh, am I doing it well? We kept hearing that kind of sentiment laced with a little bit of fear and trepidation. So those questions and fears were confirmation that indeed this training was needed. So out of our strategic planning in 2021 came this idea of action pathways around OER adoption, open pedagogy, revision and collection of OER, and open textbook publishing, all under the umbrella of increasing educational equity through the openly licensed resources that we create. So these pathways definitely come out of areas which our members have repeatedly expressed wanting more support. So while today's presentation focuses on one aspect of Open Ped, just know that the Open Education Network has been hard at work creating openly licensed professional development opportunities and resources in all of these areas to contribute back to all of higher ed. So specifically, why an open ped learning circle? Well, we knew that we would need a suite of professional development opportunities and resources to properly support people on their open pedagogy journeys. So we actually started through the creation of a year-long IMLS-funded Certificate in Open Educational Practices program that's in its second iteration. But we knew that people craved community and support for Open Ped, and we knew that not everybody would want to engage in a year-long program. So we created a shorter-term opportunity to engage in a facilitated, safe space to explore open pedagogy, which was the Open Pedagogy Learning Circle. We wanted to ensure that participants had plenty of opportunities to read and view resources that would help to contextualize Open Ped for them, that they would have a safe place to discuss and learn and to create with hands-on opportunities within a facilitated space. And as I mentioned earlier, half of the battle is this feeling of like, I'm not doing it right. So we wanted people like Amanda and Jamie who could come alongside participants and offer that very timely help, support, and encouragement. And then finally, we wanted participants to have the opportunity to create a renewable assignment or a learning object in a kind of show what you know type of situation. And the results, as you will see later, were pretty awesome.
Okay, so for our information, we are interested in knowing where are you at in sort of like instructor development programming in your institution on open education topics. Now, that does not mean that it has to be open pedagogy. It could be that you're still working with them around what is open. It could be open access. It could be open educational resources. It could be Creative Commons licensing information, helping them understand sort of like their rights as authors. Or it could be, hey, we've been doing this for a while. Now they're ready to move on to open pedagogy and open educational practices. So the options, oh goodness, didn't get updated correctly. So the first one is just getting started with bases, and then doing it for a while. And option 3 was supposed to be just that like you've been doing it forever. And we have some people who have been tempted by option 3. So pretty even split. So I think that we're all in really good shape to have this conversation. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Tanya to share a little bit about, I believe, the background, the learning circle, getting started with the learning circle.
Yeah, so when Amanda and I kind of embarked on this journey, we wanted to make sure that it was informed by best practice. And so we explored about 17 different resources on learning circles, and some of it was open pedagogy and some of it wasn't. And then we compiled a set of best practices and kind of parameters to use in order to build out the learning circle curriculum. So you can scan the QR code there if you'd like to take a look at the different resources that we reviewed and discussed before we actually started building them out.
All right. So based on sort of the research that we did, Tanya and I sort of compiled a list of best practices that we saw across the board throughout those resources. And those are that you want to keep it kind of small, 12 to 15 participants, and also plan for a little bit of attrition. So people are going to fall off. Not everybody is going to be able to make it to every session, particularly if you're thinking about like facilitating and either a synchronous or asynchronous thing, like stuff happens, and we want to be really respectful of like lived experience, and we know that emergency happens and that sometimes people don't just feel it. And then also that there was that dovetailing it with opening and closing activities that are similar every time help to sort of set the space for folks. So it transitions them into being able to think about this stuff, and it transitions them out of it so that they can go back about the rest of their day. And that there needs to be some sort of intentional focus on community building. So whether that is through silly questions where everybody says what they like or don't like, or if you have them go around and popcorn to talk about something like a question of the day kind of thing. We chose to embrace sort of the flipped model where there would be some pre-work before they came to the session. And that way they'd be ready to have discussions. And then one thing that we learned was that if you're integrating tools throughout, make sure that they're really intentional. And so we chose to do that. And the examples that I have here are doing an annotation assignment inside of Hypothesis, or using Jamboard to have like a live discussion activity. And I'm very sad that they're sunsetting Jamboard. That breaks my heart. And then also providing opportunities for folks to have reflection in each session. And we tried to capture that in our closing activities, which you'll see a little bit later. And then importance of allowing people to experience open pedagogy through the learning circle. So there was a lot of research that said that whatever topic that you are talking about, like allow people to have the best experience of like trying to do that thing, to trying to practice it in a safe space with other people who are learning at the same time. So there's a lot of peer learning. And then emphasis on creating something practical for future use. So if they are doing some sort of concrete activity, how does that apply to after the learning circle, after they have moved on from being in your space, if it's not continuing on? So what we offered was a free virtual 7-week facilitated learning circle experience where they would share, learn, discuss, and create open pedagogy. So we wanted them to build a foundational level of understanding of open pedagogy. So anybody could join this. That's why the first session is what is open pedagogy? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then discover what open pedagogy does, as well as how they can incorporate it either into their classroom or in supporting instructors who want to do that. And gain hands-on experience with open pedagogy through the creation of a renewable assignment. So either they are editing a disposable assignment, or if they didn't have an, are already sort of on the pathway, just so that they would leave some sort of assignment that they could insert into their courses. Or if they're in an instructor support role, a digital learning object that fits their institutional context. And then they also had the option of having a 30-minute consultation with Jamie outside of our synchronous sessions together to assist with their questions around open pedagogy or like the open pedagogy assignment that they were doing. So we had 38 people apply who applied to our call for participants. And we started by eliminating anybody who didn't complete the form accurately, which is always surprising to me that that happens, but it always seems to happen. And so we ended up with 33 people. We accepted 12 instructors for the first round and 6 instructor support roles. And then the remaining were going to be invited to the second offering that ran this fall in 2023 by Jamie. So I had 3 goals for the Learning Circle. The first was that people would have hands-on experience doing open pedagogy, because that seems to be the really scary thing, right? You're trying something new. And I really wanted them to envision what it was like for their students to participate in one. And also, if you're in an instructor support role, sometimes you feel like you're not the expert because you don't do the thing. So you get some experience doing the thing so that you could be able to help instructors at your institution. And then have participants create an assignment or learning object that's useful in their institutional context. So we didn't want them to create something that was disposable. We wanted something that they would be able to use again and again. And then build community and expertise through facilitating sessions and discussions with each other. So I'm going to go really lightning fast through what's in the sessions. You have these slides. There's also a train the trainer session that you can watch if you want this more in depth. But so the first session was what is open pedagogy? And we really wanted to just set definitions. What is that? What is open pedagogy? What does that mean? And the takeaway from that session was that there was a great selection of themes about open pedagogy. So a lot of people were able to really find parts of the definitions that resonated with them, whether it was that it's learner-centered, that it's about collaboration, that it's renewable, that it's not just about being low cost in your course, but really handing over some ownership to learning to students. And we used Mentimeter as sort of like the tool of the week. In the second session, we talked really explicitly about disposable versus renewable assignments. And I find that this is where, at least in my personal experience working individually with instructors, I find that this is sometimes where they get hung up over the idea of what could be a disposable assignment. And also sometimes being offended that their assignment is disposable, even though that's sort of the nature of the beast. And so I wanted to make sure we took a deep dive into what that could look like. And I think that this is one of my favorite sessions because I learned something new that I took away with me in that session, was that the idea of assignments being renewable and disposable doesn't have to be in the binary opposition of each other. It can be on a spectrum. So things can be more or less renewable or disposable. And it's okay to like move that dial slowly towards being completely renewable. And we talked about the tool Flipgrid, and they got to do that asynchronously that week. In session 3, we talked about really important topics around how do you do open pedagogy inside your classroom? So thinking about making sure that we're prioritizing consent for students, that we're realizing that this is scary for students. So building a brave space, how do we let them feel like they are in a place where they can be brave? And then also engaging in care in the open. So how do we make sure that we're taking care of our students as they embark into this more scary space? This is education like they have probably never experienced before. And we're asking them to perform work in the open most of the time around this. And the takeaway from that session was that all of those things are really intertwined in how we build out these open pedagogy assignments in our course and are completely necessary when we ask students to work in the open. And we used hypothesis this week. And so they participated in a shared reading from one of their reading selections that we had. And I found that doing that in the learning circle space really helped build empathy for their students in having to tackle a brand new tool. So thinking about all the questions they had, what didn't make sense. There was a lot of difficulty about like getting them into groups. So they saw sort of like all of the sticky wickets that exist when you are trying to scaffold and onboard somebody into a tool. Session 4, we talked about accessibility, scaffolding, and universal design for learning. And the takeaway from that was that universal design for learning and open pedagogy are really complementary practices, and that it's really important to model scaffolding concepts to students and instructors. So if you're in the instructor support role, how can you model that work for instructors? And this week we took a look at H5P. So there was an H5P activity inside of the curriculum that they could do to do a formative assessment of their knowledge around universal design for learning. In session 5, we talked about open pedagogy, social justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the takeaway from this session, and this was our Jamboard session, the takeaway from this session was that it was really important to start small and build with intentionality when incorporating social justice and DEI into open pedagogy projects, and that is really okay. Like, we want to do it right and thoughtfully and with care. Session 6 is one of my favorite sessions. It was the tool showcase. So Jamie and I collaborated on the session and co-presented to really explore what kind of tools folks can use to do open pedagogy. And the takeaway was that, please, if you are running this session, expect a very robust discussion from the people in your learning circle, because they really love sharing their favorite tool that they used and what they used them for. And by far, that discussion was one of my favorites. Like, it was so lively, and folks were just really jazzed about like how they were doing this in their classrooms already. Session 7 is also my favorite session. I have lots of favorite sessions, but this was show and tell. So they had been working all of this time on their learning project, their open pedagogy learning projects, and this was their opportunity to show it off and show us what they built during that project. And so each participant had 3 to 5 minutes to share out their learning circle project. And I'm not going, these links are clickable if you open the slide deck, and you can go check them out. And it was just really lovely to see what everybody built, and everybody was like, oh, that's so awesome. I wish I had thought to do that. So again, just lots of joy in sort of that final session. The other thing that we did in session 7 was do some assessment. So it's very hard to get people to fill out surveys. So I like to try and capture some of that information. So we had a little bit of a more robust Menti in that session, where we gathered some information about like what their favorite sessions were. And I'll talk a little bit about more of that when we get to assessment. So the learning circle projects, the goal is just that they get to practice doing open pedagogy. So they're going to create a renewable assignment, or they're going to create a learning object that they can use at their institution. And there are instructions. These links are clickable, and I believe they're also in the link tree. And so it's a very scaffolded process. They have a certain thing that they do weeks 2 through 5 or 6, and it uses Stacy Katz and Jennifer Van Allen's renewable assignment framework for the assignment transformation, so that they have also like a framework to help that scaffolding process. Okay, I've talked a lot, so now I'm going to hand it over to Jamie to chat a little bit.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello again, everyone. So I'm just going to talk briefly a little bit about some of the collaboration that went into designing the curriculum between myself and Amanda. So as Amanda said, she came up with all of these sessions, and so we really started meeting about how to incorporate these particular tools in these individual sessions. So we met several times as Amanda was developing this curriculum to think about which tool made the most sense for the topic of the session, and how we wanted to scaffold those tools throughout the learning circle. And so we came up with the individual tools like Jamboard, H5P, Hypothesis. And as I mentioned in the chat, for the second iteration, since Jamboard is going away, sadly, we used Padlet. So we updated the curriculum in that way. But we really were focused on being intentional with how we wanted to use these tools, the same way that we wanted our participants to think about these tools and how they would use them in their own work. It's really easy to sort of get caught up in a flashy new tool and the really cool exports or output that it can create. But it's so important to be intentional and really think about the pedagogical purpose that you would be using a tool for. How is it going to help your students succeed or reach a particular learning outcome? Because at the end of the day, the end user for all of this are the students that are in these courses that are engaging in open pedagogy. So we picked the individual tools for each individual session. And then I also created the Open Pedagogy Learning Tools documentation, which has all of the additional tools that we showcased in session 6. So the goal of the documentation was to align these learning tools, like I said, with a pedagogical purpose and a use case. So the documentation, which is, I believe, linked in the link tree if you want to explore it, and it's openly licensed as well, so you can adapt it for your own institution. It's organized by use case, and then it also has an alphabetical index for each of the tools. So another important note, and this was something that was mentioned throughout the learning circle, is that based on institutional context, some tools are likely more appropriate than others. As Amanda mentioned, we used Hypothesis for session 3. So some institutions may have a Hypothesis plugin for their LMS, which would make it a really easy way to get students into working with it, as opposed to using the web-based public version. Or some institutions might have a tool called Perusall, which is an institutionally licensed program that's not publicly available. And so that might be an easier thing to plug in and get ready to use if it's something offered by your institution. So we talked a lot about going back to IT and thinking about the tools that are readily available to you. And so all the tools in the documentation, again, we discussed during the tool showcase. We were able to give examples for each of those use cases. And there's about, I think, 6 categories of use cases and about 5 to 6 tools within each of those use cases. And so in that index in the documentation, there are links to instructional material for how to use and get started with these individual tools, licensing information, and then also there's a difficulty of use rating from 1 to 5. Most of the tools are between 1 and 2 on the difficulty of use, but there are a couple that are a little bit more advanced. Right, and if we could go to the next slide, please, Amanda. So the other component of the Learning Circle sessions was offering one-on-one consultations. And so the goal of these consultations was really to just provide support and guidance on the different content that we had been discussing throughout the week and throughout the full 7 sessions, and then also thinking about their final project. So they were really informal conversations, and most of the time I was sort of just a sounding board, just an opportunity for folks to talk about what they were thinking about and maybe provide some guidance on a tool that could help them accomplish their final project, or thinking about how they would scaffold their final project if it's a renewable assignment throughout their course. The consultations were set up as 30 minutes through Zoom, and we received a lot of mixed feedback in terms of format for a consultation. The folks who attended who I did meet with really liked that it was through Zoom and for 30 minutes. But there were also other options where folks wanted to just meet asynchronously, maybe just through a really quick chat through Discord or Slack, or even just through email for some longer asynchronous conversations. So I ended up meeting with 4 participants from the pilot learning circle. 3 were faculty participants and 1 was a faculty support participant. And so in the slides, these are 2 of the projects that I consulted on. The first is a renewable assignment called the Teacher Toolbox. And I helped the instructor decide what tool, which ended up being Google Sites, to create this platform for students to create this really robust research database that students could continue to build on semester over semester. And then the second one is OA at ETSU, which was an existing site that talked about open access at this institution. And I worked with this faculty support person to think about how they can incorporate the many open pedagogy principles that we had been discussing. So I also offered consultations during the second round of the Learning Circle, which just wrapped up 3 weeks ago, I think. Our last session was the week before Halloween. And the goal remained the same. It was really just an opportunity to have these informal conversations, sort of think out loud with another person, and offer some guidance. The format and time was completely open this time. Every time at the end of a session, when I would remind folks that we could meet, I offered Zoom, I offered email, chat. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 45 minutes. It was completely open. And so again, I ended up meeting with 4 participants, 2 faculty participants and 2 faculty support participants. One consultation this time was completely through email, just back and forth several exchanges about their final project. The other 3 were through Zoom, with one of them continuing to have additional consultations through email as we worked through the rest of the sessions. And so again, I have 2 of those example projects there. Open Pedagogy Interconnected Branches was created by one of our faculty support folks. It's a really nice infographic that really visualizes how a lot of these open pedagogy principles are all interconnected. And then the second is MLK and the Ecology of Black Thought, which was a renewable assignment created by a political science professor that incorporated DEI principles, social annotation, lots of student choice built into the assignment, and Creative Commons instruction. And now I'm going to pass it off to Lauren to talk about her experience as a faculty participant.
Thank you, Jamie. So I wanted to kind of focus my my time here kind of short, so that if it sparks anything you want to ask about in the questions, you have plenty of time, or if you want to email me, you can do so as well. And so my my perspective starts with the context I had before the Learning Circle. So I had a lot of OER experience before joining the Learning Circle, and that wasn't necessarily true of the other faculty that were in the group. And that actually benefited our whole community conversations quite a lot. People are asking good questions that I hadn't ever thought about, and in terms of open pedagogy, I was still quite new. So I knew a lot of the foundational ideas and tools that go into that went into the Learning Circle. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I am the OER coordinator for my campus. I got that role, or I started that role in fall of 2019, and have been doing that work ever since. That role currently, after a big restructuring, falls in the Teaching, Learning, and Distance Education Office at GRCC. And so I'm a faculty liaison as well. So faculty seem to respond pretty well to having someone who is in their same role, being able to answer the questions and learn from each other. So in terms of the Learning Circle, I was very excited to be able to be part of it. A lot of the reason I was so excited is because all of these resources are shared freely with everyone, this idea of shared abundance. And so by being able to be a participant, I was then able to be empowered to host my own Learning Circle. And I plan to do so next year. I'm currently running a different Learning Circle that is a book club around equity-minded teaching. There were a lot of really great highlights during the Learning Circle. So I was in the first of the 2 sessions. And it's funny that Amanda mentioned one of her highlights was this idea that disposable versus renewable assignments are kind of on a spectrum, because that was a conversation that I started in the community that we had together and just kind of built. And a lot of it came from the fact that a lot of these faculty members were getting quite a bit stressed over, like, well, is this thing that I've just thought of as a hypothetical renewable or not? Is this thing renewable or not? and kind of making sure that we were keeping track of the big picture, that like any progress is good progress. And so it was really nice to have those conversations, because without the learning circle, I never would have thought about that before. A lot of what you learn when you're going through on your own with these new definitions kind of make it seem like this big dichotomy. And then the next slide, when I do get to it, is going to be the renewable assignment. But I wanted to note that one of the best things about this learning circle was the impact that it continues to have. It really started a lot of these thoughts percolating that are still moving forward. So I not only am planning to kind of implement this renewable assignment, but it is really starting me thinking about shifting from the OpenStax astronomy textbook that I use and love, into shifting that into LibreText. So the same great open textbook, but having the textbook kind of co-creation or editing process with students be an ongoing part as a kind of larger aspect of the course. So I haven't started that work yet, but it is definitely something that I would not have thought about without this learning circle, and I'm very excited about it. And then, as I mentioned before, leading a learning circle like this through the teaching learning office on campus by having the curriculum available. All right, next slide, Amanda. So this is probably accessible through the link tree, but this QR code will bring you to my particular assignment. So one of the things I do in my astronomy course, and this is something that you could think about for lots of different disciplines, is I have a project-based course. They don't have a lot of like big tests with multiple choice questions. Instead, every 2 weeks, they have a big project. And a project that I used to have them do is to make a handout about a scholar or astronomer that typically isn't represented in textbooks. So this is something that I've been doing for quite a while, whether it's cultures that aren't typically highlighted in textbooks, or people that were more behind the scenes, a lot of women and underrepresented minorities. And so I wanted to keep that same idea, but have it be something that, rather than a handout that I look at and they make, and maybe I hope they feel proud of, but we just kind of all move on from it, that it becomes something renewable. And this ties into this idea of having the textbook be on a platform that is editable in a very easy way. And I'm a big fan of LibreText. And so when you go through the assignment, if you look at it, there is still an option for them to do the handout. What I found is that a lot of students feel uncomfortable trying these different new ideas. And when the handout itself was still working very well for some students to feel motivated to accomplish those tasks, I want that option to still be available. But I've added this opportunity to create a small snippet that gets added into the textbook with a interactive element of some kind that's scaffolded through the different tools available. So that's as much as I wanted to share right now. But if you do have questions, please make sure to ask them in the Q&A at the end, and I will put my email address in the chat. So I'm now going to hand it back to Amanda for the next portion of our talk together.
Yeah, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite thing, assessment. Okay, so assessment, because it was the first time that we were running this project, part of the assessment was built in throughout the weekly activities as part of the closing activities. So making sure that folks are like still like just doing a check-in, making sure everybody is on the same page, that if there are folks who are super confused, I could touch base with them afterwards. And we did, so there were that version through the weekend, through Mentimeter and the closing activities. And then I did a final check-in during the last session through Mentimeter. So that's the more robust part of session 7 that I was talking about. And so like I asked, like, what was your favorite session? And it tied between caring for students in the open pedagogy, social justice, and diversity, equity, inclusion, or a combination of multiple sessions. That was the other option that they had, was like, I can't pick one. I did a survey at the end of the learning circle experience, and the survey was completed by half of the participants who regularly attended the session. So we had 6 responses, which I actually think is pretty great for super busy people. So one of the things that I wanted to ask was whether or not they felt like it was valuable to have that Mentimeter interaction. Just because I love it and I'm super jazzed about it doesn't mean that it's an effective tool to do what we're trying to do pedagogically in learning circles. So I wanted to make sure that it allowed people to feel more engaged. I also wanted to check in with them about the final project. We definitely didn't want it to feel like busy work. We had one respondent, I believe, who said that it was. And then other folks said that it was a good way to apply what they had learned during the learning circle. And then the other thing I was interested in is whether they felt like after going through the learning circle, did they feel like it would help them improve their teaching or more confidently assist instructors improve their teaching through the power of open pedagogy? And I was really pleased that like most people said either strongly or agree. There was like no dissension, that it did have value to them. And now I'm going to let Jamie talk about assessing the second version of the learning circle.
Thanks, Amanda. So I followed a very similar assessment process. So we kept the weekly check-ins. Like Amanda said, she was doing this sort of just as the pilot to check in with folks, but I think it was a really valuable exercise to check in at the end of every week because it is so much content in each week in a very short amount of time. Each session is only 1 hour, and sometimes we're running 2 minutes before we're supposed to end with content. So I think it was really important to continue those check-ins weekly, just make sure everybody is able to work through this and be able to digest the material. And again, to reach out to me if they are hitting a point that is a little bit sticky for them. I also did the final check-in during the last session through Mentimeter, and the favorite sessions, very similar to Amanda's, were the open pedagogy, social justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. There were also several votes for the show and tell session itself. Folks really enjoyed seeing each other's projects and sort of learning from each other in that way. And then the Menti results also show 1 vote, 1 vote, 1 vote, 1 vote for a combination of multiple sessions, just enjoying every single session that we put together. I also offered the survey at the end of the learning circle experience with a couple of changed questions just based on some updates to the curriculum. And the survey was completed by 63% of the participants. So that was 7 out of 11 folks who attended regularly. So this is just to compare from the pilot to the second round. We'll look at the same 3 questions that Amanda just showed. So the use of Menti allowed me to feel more engaged in the learning circle experience. I would say it's closer to 100%. You'll see that the yellow is still a yes, that they were engaged, but that they were frustrated that the links weren't clickable on Menti. And so we've also seen that in the chat just now that is a limitation of the way the Menti slides are imported into Menti from Google, that the links aren't clickable in Menti versus actually being clickable in the Google slide deck. So both were shared during each session, just like today. So there may be some playing around that I'll do with Menti to see if there's another way that we could look at importing the slides so that they are clickable. And then again, looking at creating the final project from all 7 folks who completed the survey, they all thought it was a good way for them to apply what they had learned during the learning circle. So that was really exciting to see. And then lastly, we had, along with Amanda's pilot group, no dissension among folks who completed the survey. But we had 71% strongly agree that completing the learning circle will help improve their teaching or make them more confident in assisting instructors, and 28% just agree with that. So still really positive feedback on the overall experience of being in the learning circle.
Okay, so now we're going to chat about our lessons learned. So in the pilot learning circle, the takeaways were that in addition to, like, you can't just expect everybody to go through the curriculum the way that you intend. And so one of the ways, we had people who were only engaging through the weekly emails. So like the link to Canvas needed to go into that weekly email, so people would go there. They wanted more direction on the final project and more examples. Well, it was the first time, so we didn't have any, but now there are examples. Build in more formative assessments in the Canvas course, and update the project submission form to include link intakes and description of the project. So if people wanted to turn in links and the form didn't originally do that.
So moving with the feedback that and the takeaway that Amanda had, we had a much more folks engaged with the Canvas site. I believe on the evaluation survey, 100% of folks said that they engaged with Canvas. But because there were so many different ways to access material, we had the Canvas, which is sort of the main place to access the curriculum and go through your weekly project work, renewable assignment steps. We also had the link tree like we're using today, which is more of a day of resource, how I was using it to really easily access those quick links that we're talking about during that individual session. And then Menti and the slide decks. So the takeaway is to provide a little bit more walkthrough of what those resources are and how to use them in the first session as we're getting set up and getting to know each other. And again, folks still wanted more direction on the final project and more examples. So I did provide, based on the pilot sessions, take away more examples of the projects, but even integrating more of that, I think, would be more helpful. And then based on additional comments in the evaluation, folks really wanted more opportunities for discussion. So one of those particular comments focused on wanting to share their project progress with their peers about halfway through the learning circle. So getting to see what folks are working on, where they're all at with their learning projects, so they can learn from each other. And Amanda mentioned this when she was reviewing session 6, but more time for tool discussion. Folks really want to dig into the tools and talk about the tools that they use and hear how other folks are using them. So potential update to the curriculum as we're moving into the spring that we'll be thinking about is moving from a 7-week session to 8 weeks to incorporate that extra need for discussion, maybe splitting a session in 2 so that folks have the chance, a 20-minute opportunity in that session to share their project progress, really thinking about how we can create more spaces for connection. Like I said, each session is really packed to the brim with content. So other than the Menti questions, it's hard to fit in some additional discussion. So really thinking about ways to include that a little bit more. And then because folks really wanted to continue talking about these different open pedagogy principles and how they're engaging with it, the OEN is facilitating a community of practice around open pedagogy. So in the last email to folks, I also invited them to join this community of practice so they can really continue to talk about this work and meet with folks who are working through the same things.
Okay, we're going to do a quick Menti here. Would a learning circle benefit your program? And your options are not right now, but maybe in the future, yes or no. Most of you are in the yes category. That's really lovely to see. In the spirit of time, I'm going to breeze through some of this so that we have plenty of time to talk about, have time for questions. So the curriculum. My goal for the curriculum was to create a modular experience that you could sort of plug and play at your institution and use as a template to run a learning circle from. We provided templates for emails, the activities, and assessment. And we also provided a complete curriculum on open pedagogy as an example of a topic for a learning circle. So you can use the Canvas course with no problem. It's openly licensed and it is open to the public. There's no login required. So you could use those as part of your facilitation of a learning circle on open pedagogy at your institution. The curriculum is pick and choose what pieces work for your institutional context. So it's very customizable. And while the topics covered there in the example model are open pedagogy, you could very easily take this model and do it for open educational resources or Creative Commons licensing or whatever topic you would like to adapt it to. We wanted to provide a framework for what a learning circle could look like. So what do you get? The Canvas course gives you a how to use the curriculum. It gives you 7 session modules, and it also gives you a link out to the Google curriculum folder for the facilitator resources. The Google curriculum version also has how to use this documentation. It has the activities folder, the email form, and form templates, all of the templates. It has handouts that you can use each week. It has the slide decks and the Learning Circle projects, and also that open Pedagogy Learning Circle tools documentation. What's in a session? The sessions are designed to run for an hour. It starts with that temperature check activity, an opening activity that's that fun activity to get them used to. There's a presentation of concepts, then a discussion activity for those concepts, and then another temperature check to see how folks are feeling after the session, and then a closing activity that asks what folks are taking away with them. And then you wrap up and do the details for the next week. So assignment reminders and pre-work information. This QR code will take you directly to the OEN's Open Pedagogy page, where you will not only find the Open Pedagogy curriculum links, you'll find the Open Pedagogy portal link, the Open Pedagogy student toolkit, which we're very excited about. I'm super stoked about it. Can't wait to use it in my courses. And also the Train the Trainer video for the Learning Circle curriculum. All right, let's do those closing activities. So how are you feeling after the session? Your options are that you are still excited, or maybe you got excited. You could be confused, ready to go. Let's do this. Your poor brain cannot cope, and you might feel overwhelmed. And then if you're feeling something else, go ahead and put it in the chat. Kathy is not in the Menti, but she is excited. And then the next thing that we would do is we would ask, what is one thing that you are taking away from the Mentimeter, from this session today? New resources. Yes, please take the resources. They're there for you to use it. How can I recruit enough people to participate from only 80 faculty? I don't think it has to be a huge circle. You could have a circle of like 5 people from those 8 faculty, or a couple people who are just interested in doing it. Plans to develop a learning circle on my campus. New ideas for our faculty grant recipient training curriculum. That's lovely. An outline for what I could do next. Resourceful resources bank. A detailed outline on how to lead an OP learning circle. Thank you for all the compliments. So when we logged into the session and there was like one person, I was like, this workshop is a success. We had one person show up and ready to go. Obviously, there are way more of you here now, but I think that there's a power, like you can do a lot of really in-depth and detailed work with smaller groups of people. And then they get really excited about it and they'll go tell other faculty about it who will want to do it. All right, so this is an example of how we would do the closing session. And I want to open up the floor to questions. So I'm going to go ahead and thank you. And I'm also going to stop sharing my screen so that we can feel like a group.
Amanda, I like Julie's question in the chat and would love to hear your thoughts on that. She said, and I know since you're sharing your screens, you may not see it. She said, this is great. My only question has to do with why I host this on Canvas as opposed to an open platform. Kathy S. Miller, she's asking the question out loud.
Thank you, Kathy. So the reason that we hosted it on Canvas as opposed to an open platform is that the OEN already hosts a lot of educational material on Canvas. So the Pub 101 curriculum is also on Canvas. They use Canvas for the Open Educational Practices certificate. Tanya, and am I missing anything? The Open Education Librarianship Program, does that certificate also use Canvas?
It does.
Yeah. So so one of the things that we recommend in the curriculum is that you take a look at what tools are at your disposal at your institution when you're thinking about tools, and really make use of what is already being institutionally paid for, or that you have access to. Anything that lowers those barriers to access is what you want to kind of take into consideration. And so that was why we decided to use Canvas as opposed to an open platform.
Well, following the fine example, I would like to highlight another question in the chat from Nancy O'Neill that said, I'd love to hear more about how to engage participants in thinking about how they assess students with open pedagogy assignments, both exploring new or different ways to assess student learning, but also practical things like how to evaluate students individually if their co-creation is group-based.
Do you want to take that, Lauren? Thinking about assessment of open pedagogy assignments with students?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that's not an easy answer, because whether we're talking about open pedagogy or just traditional teaching methods, any two faculty are going to have very different views on how to assess learning, whether it's rubrics, whether it's kind of points-based grading or standards-based grading. So that's a good question, and it's worth asking the faculty in your own learning circle to think about how they currently assess students, whether it's group projects or individuals, and how they would be able to adjust that, because trying to tell them the correct answer, I don't think is going to be valuable or useful. But certainly having that be a discussion question posed to the faculty in that current group would be a very useful thing to potentially add.
I'll say also that Amanda could have gone down the rabbit hole of ungrading and everything like that. And I feel like we really had to stay close to scope, and she did a great job, but there's still so much. It's really robust. And people said that they wanted a little bit more time to discuss. So that's why we're contemplating making it 8 weeks. But I'll just say assessment is like a huge sticky wicket that's necessary to talk about, but that wasn't necessarily within scope of the 7-week-long learning circle. But I did put the public version of the certificate in Open Educational Practices course in the chat, and we do get into that a little bit.
Yeah, we like other topics we had considered like ramming into this was open syllabus, ungrading. So thinking about authentic assessments and how that can change when you're doing it with open materials and open pedagogy projects. But I think that ungrading it could be its own learning circle. Like it could be like a whole own learning circle about ungrading. And I think that what I really wanted to drive home was the idea that this is not scary. So we're inside a brave space rather than a safe space, and brave spaces allow us to be uncomfortable and to learn and grow through that discomfort. And that I really wanted folks to think about scaffolding as key. All of these components need to be scaffolded.